Once hailed as the nation's defender of integrity, now stands accused of corruption, hypocrisy, and betrayal, on a scale that has left Britain teetering on the edge of collapse. The rise of Keir Starmer, once a story of triumph and promise, has now been eclipsed by a fall so catastrophic it has shaken the pillars of government, monarchy, and democracy itself. The Supreme Court's ruling landed like a thunderclap in Westminster, tearing apart the illusion of stability that Starmer had carefully built. For months, rumours swirled through the corridors of power, murmurs of missing money, secretive donors, and unexplained gifts quietly delivered to Downing Street. But today, those murmurs transformed into cold, hard evidence. In a televised address that gripped the nation, Chief Justice Dame Sue Carr declared with unflinching clarity, "No one, not even the Prime Minister, is above the law." With those words, the court did not merely criticise Starmer, it demanded his immediate resignation, plunging Britain into a constitutional crisis unseen for centuries. The judgment revealed a staggering financial scandal at the very heart of government. A mysterious £124,000 had vanished from Starmer's property and tax records, its trail buried in offshore accounts and shell companies stretching from Jersey to the Isle of Man. Investigators uncovered more, £39,000 worth of undisclosed luxury perks, ranging from private jet flights to designer suits and rare bottles of vintage wine. Among the most shocking revelations was a Rolex watch worth more than most families earn in months, gifted to him by a billionaire donor seeking political favours. For a leader who built his career on attacking Tory elites for corruption, the hypocrisy was devastating. The evidence painted a picture not of a man fighting for justice, but of one ensnared in the same murky web of influence and greed he once condemned. But money alone was not the root of the scandal. Buried deep in the court's findings were accusations of something far darker, a deliberate abuse of power to silence critics and manipulate democracy itself. Court documents detailed how government lawyers were deployed to intimidate journalists investigating his finances. Regulators were quietly pressured to restrict Reform UK from televised debates, ensuring Starmer faced weaker opponents on the political stage. Donors who questioned his leadership found themselves targeted by sudden tax audits, while whistleblowers were bullied into silence. The court described this as a systemic assault on the foundations of democracy, a chilling indictment that struck at the very core of his legitimacy. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Within minutes of the judgment, protests erupted across London. Crowds surged through Westminster, chanting, "Resign now," and waving banners declaring, "No one is above the law." Social media ignited with fury, as footage of demonstrators clashing with police spread like wildfire. Opposition leaders seized the moment, demanding fresh elections and branding. Starmer, a disgrace in a red tie. Even inside his own party, panic began to spread. Senior Labour MPs broke ranks live on air, condemning him as a liability and urging him to step aside. One bluntly declared, "If he stays, the party falls." Yet despite the tidal wave of anger, Starmer refused to bow. In a defiant late-night address, Starmer dismissed the court's decision as politically motivated, calling it a judicial coup designed to undermine his government. His refusal to step down transformed the scandal into a full-scale constitutional crisis. Britain now faced a question not asked in centuries. What happens when a Prime Minister openly rejects the authority of the Supreme Court? For the first time in living memory, the rule of law itself seemed to hang in the balance. Inside Number 10, the atmosphere turned toxic. Reports emerged of aides shredding documents, ministers drafting resignation letters, and advisers quietly fleeing the sinking ship. The corridors of power, once buzzing with authority, now echoed with panic and betrayal. Cabinet ministers whispered of no-confidence letters, while civil servants began refusing orders they deemed unlawful. What had started as a scandal about money was spiralling into an all-out collapse of government. The Prime Minister's grip on power was slipping with every passing hour, yet still he clung to his chair in defiance, as if denial could shield him from reality. And then came the whispers from Buckingham Palace. King Charles, abandoning his holiday at Balmoral, returned to London for emergency meetings with advisers. Palace insiders suggested that the nuclear option was now on the table, the use of royal prerogative to dismiss a Prime Minister who refuses to obey the law. It was a power not used since 1834, a relic of monarchical history suddenly revived in the face of modern crisis. The thought of Crown and government colliding head-on sent shockwaves. Through the establishment, historians warned that Britain had not faced such a constitutional abyss since the days of civil war. The world watched in disbelief. International allies scrambled to respond, issuing urgent statements expressing concern over Britain's stability. The pound collapsed to levels unseen since the 2008 financial crisis, while European leaders gathered for emergency summits. Diplomats in Washington, Brussels, and beyond prepared contingency plans, openly questioning whether the British government still functioned. Within hours, Starmer's personal scandal had metastasised into a global crisis of confidence in the United Kingdom itself. As the sun set over Westminster, one fact was undeniable. Keir Starmer's rise had ended in a fall more spectacular than anyone could have imagined. Once seen as the guardian of justice, he was now cast as the villain of democracy. The Supreme Court had spoken, the streets had risen, the palace had stirred, and yet Britain's embattled Prime Minister refused to surrender. The nation stood on the edge of history, staring into the abyss of constitutional collapse, with Starmer's defiance threatening to push it over the brink. The crisis deepened with every passing hour, and what had begun as a legal ruling now spiralled into the most dangerous standoff Britain had witnessed in modern history. Inside the walls of Number 10, Starmer's world was collapsing. Once surrounded by loyal allies, he now faced a fortress of isolation. Senior advisors resigned mid-meeting, shredders ran late into the night, and reports leaked of aides burning sensitive files in the garden under the cover of darkness. The government's very machinery appeared to be tearing itself apart. Yet at the centre of this storm, Starmer sat defiant, clinging to the title of Prime Minister, even as the power that came with it slipped from his grasp. The Supreme Court's ruling had not only exposed financial scandal, but laid bare an entire pattern of abuse that painted Starmer as a man who used his office not for the people, but for himself. Court documents revealed disturbing accounts of how his administration weaponised state power against rivals and critics. Journalists who pressed too close to his finances were threatened with ruinous lawsuits or quietly blacklisted from government briefings. Regulators were instructed to clip the wings of political opponents like Reform UK, ensuring Labour dominance in televised debates. Even within his own party, dissenters were targeted, some losing funding for their constituencies, others finding themselves dragged through disciplinary investigations for minor infractions. The picture was clear. This was not just a Prime Minister bending rules, it was a leader dismantling them to entren. The nation reacted with fury. Tens of thousands poured into the streets of London, their chants of "Starmer out" echoing through the capital like a drumbeat of revolution. Westminster became a fortress, with police in riot gear forming barricades to contain the swelling crowds. Viral footage showed protesters climbing on statues, waving placards emblazoned with slogans like "Democracy not dictatorship" and "No one is above the law." In Trafalgar Square, bonfires of red ties burned through the night, a symbol of public disgust with a leader who had built his career on promises of integrity, only to betray them in the most spectacular fashion. The protests spread beyond London, with cities like Manchester, Birmingham and Glasgow witnessing mass demonstrations. Britain had not seen such scenes of fury in generations. But perhaps more alarming than the protests were the cracks emerging within the state itself. Senior civil servants began refusing to execute Starmer's commands, openly declaring their allegiance to the law rather than what they called a rogue administration. Reports surfaced that access to key state functions was being quietly restricted. Sensitive intelligence files were sealed, communication lines were monitored, and even nuclear command codes were locked away from the Prime Minister's reach. One permanent secretary, speaking anonymously, summed up the mood in Whitehall. He occupies Number 10, but he no longer governs Britain. Chait his authority. This defiance spread like wildfire. Cabinet ministers, once fiercely loyal, now plotted in secret, drafting no-confidence letters and whispering about resignation en masse. Some were seen slipping into late-night meetings with opposition MPs, as if preparing for a post-Starmer government. Inside Parliament, chaos reigned. Members of Parliament shouted across the chamber, waving documents and demanding immediate action. The Speaker struggled to maintain order as calls for Starmer's resignation echoed through the Commons. In the House of Lords, the Lord Speaker invoked an obscure parliamentary rule, unused for over a century, summoning peers back to London without the government's approval. It was as if every lever of the constitutional machine was moving against him. And yet Starmer remained unmoved. In his private meetings, he reportedly fumed about betrayal, railing against judges, monarchs, and his own ministers. He called the Supreme Court's ruling a judicial coup, branding protesters as agitators, and declaring that he would never be forced out by what he termed mob rule. To his dwindling circle of allies, his words sounded like strength. To the nation, they were the ravings of a leader untethered from reality. His refusal to resign had transformed scandal into an existential battle over the rule of law. The whispers from Buckingham Palace grew louder. King Charles, holding emergency consultations with constitutional scholars and senior justices, weighed options not seen in nearly 2 centuries. Palace insiders revealed 3 scenarios under consideration. A private ultimatum delivered discreetly to Number 10, a public rebuke during the state opening of Parliament, or the most explosive option, a televised address to the nation declaring the Starmer government unlawful and dismissed. That final option would send shockwaves across the globe, ripping through centuries of convention and igniting debates that would echo for generations. Yet the fact that it was even being considered underscored the gravity of the crisis. Internationally, allies looked on in disbelief. In Washington, the White House expressed serious concern about Britain's constitutional collapse, while European leaders huddled in late-night summits to prepare for financial fallout. The pound plummeted, markets reeled, and analysts warned of a recession triggered not by global forces but by the implosion of Britain's own government. NATO officials quietly questioned whether Britain, mired in chaos, could still be relied upon in a crisis. The country once hailed as a model of stability was now treated as a cautionary tale, its institutions fraying in real time under the weight of one man's defiance. On the streets, the fury reached boiling point. Protest camps sprang up outside Parliament, turning Westminster into a city under siege. Riot police clashed with demonstrators as barricades went up. Sirens wailed through the night, and chants shook the capital. "Lock him up" became the rallying cry of a nation that no longer saw its leader as legitimate. Commentators warned that Britain teetered on the edge of civil unrest on a scale not seen since the 1980s miners' strikes, or even the unrest of the 17th century Civil War. Every day, Starmer clung to power. The anger grew more dangerous, the sense of impending collapse more palpable. Yet inside Number 10, the Prime Minister remained barricaded, refusing to yield. His latest statements accused the establishment of conspiring against him, branding the court, the crown, and even his own party as enemies of democracy. He vowed to call a snap election to let the people decide, though legal experts warned he no longer had the authority to dissolve Parliament under the shadow of the Supreme Court's ruling. His defiance, once a symbol of resilience, now looked like the desperate gambit of a man watching his empire crumble. By the end of the week, Britain stood at a crossroads. Its institutions, the courts, the monarchy, the civil service, and Parliament, were aligning against a rogue Prime Minister. The people were rising in fury, the world was watching in shock, and the very foundations of democracy trembled. The rise of Keir Starmer, once a story of ambition and hope, had turned into a cautionary tale of power corrupted, trust betrayed, and a fall so spectacular it threatened to drag the nation down with him. As the storm surrounding Keir Starmer's downfall intensifies, the spotlight now shifts to the Supreme Court's damning involvement, a move that has completely shattered the fragile foundations of his leadership. What was once whispered as speculation has now become hard, cold reality. The highest judicial body in the nation has effectively declared Starmer's authority unsustainable, sending a shockwave through both Westminster and the wider country. The court's intervention is unprecedented in modern British politics. For a Prime Minister to face such a judgment is nothing short of catastrophic, a stain that no amount of spin or political manoeuvring can erase. Legal scholars are calling this moment a constitutional earthquake, one that could permanently reshape the delicate balance of power between government and judiciary. The court's vacuum. It was triggered by months of legal challenges, relentless investigations, and growing evidence of misconduct that painted a picture too severe to ignore. Now, with this ruling, Starmer's career teeters on the very edge of destruction. Resignation did not emerge in a... The reaction has been swift and unforgiving. Parliament has descended into open warfare, with opposition benches demanding an immediate resignation and even members of his own Labour Party preparing to desert him in droves. Whispers of a leadership contest are already circulating, and figures once loyal to Starmer are now calculating their chances of survival in a post-Starmer Labour Party. The betrayal runs deep. Trusted allies who once praised his leadership now speak of inevitable change and restoring credibility. Across the chamber, Conservative MPs are revelling in the chaos, framing this as proof that Labour is unfit to govern and calling for a snap election to restore stability. The atmosphere is electric, filled with raw tension, and the sense of collapse is inescapable. The very party that once prided itself on unity and renewal now looks fractured and exposed, with knives being sharpened behind closed doors. Outside Westminster, the British public is watching with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and exhaustion. Many feel betrayed by yet another leader caught in scandal, another broken promise of integrity and reform. Protests have erupted in major cities, with demonstrators demanding accountability and chanting for his immediate departure. Polls indicate a dramatic collapse in trust, with Labour's numbers plummeting as Reform UK and the Conservatives surge ahead. For ordinary citizens, this is not just a political spectacle. It is a painful reminder of how fragile leadership can be, how quickly the people's faith can be betrayed. Starmer, once seen as the man who could steady the ship after years of turmoil, is now branded as the architect of his own ruin. His fall is being compared to that of disgraced leaders from history, a cautionary tale of hubris and miscalculation. The international stage has not been kind either. Foreign governments, watching from afar, are quietly reassessing their dealings with Britain, questioning whether Starmer can possibly remain in power long enough to deliver on his promises. European leaders who once viewed him as a steady partner are now wary, while allies in Washington remain tight-lipped, avoiding open criticism, but signalling unease behind the scenes. Britain's global credibility is hanging by a thread, with uncertainty clouding trade negotiations, defence agreements, and diplomatic partnerships. The world senses weakness, and weakness invites pressure. For a nation already strained by economic challenges and social unrest, the timing could not be worse. This is more than a domestic scandal. It is a crisis that places Britain's standing on the global stage at risk. The Supreme Court's call for resignation is the final hammer blow, the ultimate confirmation that Starmer's leadership is no longer tenable. It strips away any illusion of control, leaving him exposed to the harshest scrutiny. Legal experts suggest that ignoring such a ruling would plunge the country into an even deeper constitutional crisis, one that could paralyse government functions entirely. Yet Starmer, stubborn and desperate, clings to the remnants of power, insisting he can still govern, still deliver, still survive. But every hour that passes makes his position weaker, every headline tighter around his political neck. The Labour Party stands on the brink of implosion, and the United Kingdom stands on the edge of a dangerous void. This is not just the fall of a leader, it is the unravelling of an entire political era, and its echoes will be felt for generations to come.